Hey guys, Argent Templar here. So we're here with the first real argument for God's existence. This is the first argument, and we're going to go through all of them, and it's going to be part of the cumulative proof for God's existence. So this is actually, I think, my personal favorite argument. This or the moral argument. I kind of like both of them. So without further ado, let's begin. And we're going to start all of these with a quote. Forgive me, I'm very bad at reading out loud. Of things that exist, substances are the first. But if substances can, then all things can perish. That is, if substances can perish, then all things can perish. And yet, time and change cannot. That is, the concept of time and change are eternal. Now, the only continuous change is that of place, and the only continuous change of place is circular motion. Therefore, there must be an eternal circular motion, and this confirmed by the fixed stars which are moved by the eternal actual substance that is purely actual. Thus there must be an immortal, unchanging being ultimately responsible for all wholeness and orderliness and motion in the sensible world. And that is something Aristotle said in Metaphysics. I'll just briefly say so basically, what he's saying here is if all substances that exist can perish, then in the end everything will perish. So if everything can perish, then there must be an immaterial source of time and change. There must be something that is moving the universe. There must be a prime mover, if you will. And the cosmological argument and the prime mover argument come from Aristotle. But there must be this first uncaused cause that causes everything else and sustains everything else. So, it was first formulated by Plato and Aristotle, but they suspect it is older with roots in pre-Socratic Greek philosophers. This is the perennial mainstay of arguments for God's existence, being a cornerstone of Islamic, Christian, Neoplatonist, and Enlightenment deistic thoughts. It's also present in a number of other religions. Ancient Chinese philosophy holds that there is Tian Shang, or there is a creator god who made heaven, or whatever, in Chinese philosophy. And in Voodoo and a number of other religions, there is this argument of the supernatural from the creator of everything. And we'll get into the argument in a minute. So this initially kind of was falling out of line with the discovery of evolution and some discoveries about the age of the universe. But with modern developments in physics, geology, and astronomy, there has been a renaissance. This argument has come back strong, and in a sense, it is the strongest time in history for this argument. There is the most physical scientific evidence for the cosmological argument in history, as we'll get into. So the basics of the argument, as formulated by William Lane Craig, who I like to use because he takes pre-existing stuff and makes it simpler and more accessible. So the argument for a cosmological argument goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. I don't really see anything problematic about this. Anything that comes into existence has a cause. Actions have a cause, events have a cause, A plus B equals C. It's pretty straightforward and logical. There are alternative views to this, that time don't exist, that events don't exist, that everything's random. I don't really buy them because planes fly 99.9% of the time. Things reliably happen when you do something. If I open my mouth to speak, 99.9999% of the time I'm capable of speaking, and if I'm not capable of speaking, there's probably a cause that's readily apparent. So I think cause and effect are pretty well established, and if you deny them, I don't really know what to say. So what are the objections to this idea? Classical scientific models assume that the universe is eternal and has always existed. It may change, and it may undergo significant change in significant phases, but it is eternal. The universe did not come into being at a specified point in time. And this is very common in traditional pagan mythology, where it goes back, but if you go into, I think, Nordic mythology, I'm not that familiar with it, the gods came from the side of an ice giant. Then you wonder where the ice giants come from, and they came from something, and then that came from something, and it's an infinite regress. Most kind of pagan theologies like that, the universe is eternal, it just keeps reinventing itself and changing. So this universe is eternal argument was killed by a Belgian Jesuit priest. Once again, we'll get into this later, but there's this idea that religion is inherently opposed to science, but the idea of the Big Bang Theory came from Georges Lemaitre, I think that's how you pronounce it, who was a Belgian priest, and he was a physicist and astronomer, and he came up with the Big Bang Theory. He observed the stars, and he realized that they were moving away from each other. He said, if everything's moving away from each other, then that must mean at one point they were all in the same place. And this is where the idea of the singularity comes from. Essentially, all the universe was infinitely compressed into one spot. And this one spot was so hot and dense that it exploded outwards. And galaxies and stars are moving away from each other, and this is how we can know the Big Bang exists. And I think some further developments in cosmology allow us to see the energy and see what the universe was like a few seconds after the Big Bang. It's very interesting. Also, he found that the total amount of energy in the universe is gradually decreasing. And this has been developed further. I know Stephen Hawking talks about this in A Brief History of Time. Eventually, the universe will lack the energy necessary to hold particles together. And all matter in existence will fall apart and go silent. The universe will eventually suffer what is called a heat death, where all the energy disappears, all matter and particles fall apart, and there will essentially just be nothingness. I don't know if it'll exactly be nothingness. There might be radiation or something, but the universe as we know it as a physical entity will more or less fall apart eventually. So the idea is if it's losing energy, then that means it was created with a finite amount of energy at some point in the past. Because if the universe had infinite energy, it could not be losing energy, because infinity minus anything is still infinity. Makes sense? Then the alternative objection is the universe is oscillating, which is another very interesting one. Oscillating is like when a fan goes back and forth. Basically, it's like the Hindu idea the universe is continually destroyed and rebuilt, time ends, time begins again, and it's an endless cycle, a cyclical nature of reality. Hindus might argue that, okay, yes, the Big Bang happened, but gravity or some other force will pull the universe back together into another singularity, cause another Big Bang, restart everything, bring all the energy back, and the process will keep happening. Stephen Hawking, though, disproved this in A Brief History of Time. He said that gravity is not strong enough to pull the universe back together before heat death happens. So all matter will fall apart and decay long before gravity is capable of pulling things back together, of stopping the expansion of the universe. And thus the universe will continually expand forever. And gravity will become weaker, particularly in a couple billion years when matter starts to fall apart and there's less gravity. And eventually there will be virtually no gravity. So the universe will continue expanding forever and there will be nothing capable of pulling it back together. So the universe does not repeat itself. So we have an eternal universe that began to exist at a specified point in time that is non-repeating and is not eternal, and this is very important to the argument. So, the third objection, one the new atheists use, is something can come from nothing. So I've never actually seen a real version of this argument. Most variants involve an intellectual sleight of hand where the definition of nothing is used incorrectly to refer to something without the reader's knowledge. So they will say, I think it was from Stephen Hawking's newest book, he said, it is self-evidently true that that gravity can create the universe from nothing. But gravity's something. Gravity's a force. Theoretically, gravity is gravitrons or little particles. But that's something. Nothing means the complete absence of anything. I think from Merriam-Webster it says not anything, no single thing. So they will say nothing, but what they mean is quantum phone, cosmic dust, energy, gravity, another fundamental force, or a prior universe. So it's not from nothing. It's from something else that they're using the term nothing for. It's like if I told someone in that room is food, but by food, I mean a fire that will consume you. And the person goes, oh, okay, I'm going to go in there and get some food. And then they walk in the room and they get consumed by a fire. It's basically just using a word in a non-standard way to try and trick people. I've never seen someone actually argue it came from nothing. Because you can't make that argument, because it's so counterintuitive. I guess you can make esoteric arguments, but they just aren't very convincing to me. So it's just using the word in a non-standard way. So the fourth objection is the multiverse, which is increasingly what scientists are turning to. I personally just think it's absurd. I think it sounds like desperation to me, but that's a subjective view. I can't grasp the multiverse and how that could be real. Basically, the idea is there's an infinite number of universes that exist with minor variations between them, although this would kind of prove the ontological argument, which we'll get into later. I basically just don't understand how this eliminates the need for a creator, as all of these things that come into existence would still need to have a cause. And the first universe to come into existence in the multiverse would need a cause. So it just overcomplicates the question. It doesn't really explain it. Also, I don't really see any evidence that this is provable or is really plausible. I, to some extent, am a seeing is believing guy, ironically enough, and I would have to see a way to get to another universe or observe another universe, like Bizarro World or something, to acknowledge this is true. And I don't know, I mean, we have Occam's razor, which actually came from a priest, by the way. It's often used to disprove God. But basically the idea of Occam's razor is the simplest, the simpler the explanation, the more general the explanation, the more likely it is to be true. And it's used against God, but it was formulated from a priest as a counter to arguments like this. That God's a lot simpler and a lot more easy to comprehend than something like the multiverse. To me, it just seems kind of absurd, unnecessarily complicated, and doesn't answer the question. So objection 4, there's also some esoteric objections. I don't really want to go into them. But basically it's stuff like time doesn't exist, things don't actually exist, things are an illusion, it's just things aren't real. It's just anti-realist, anti-science, anti-rationalist arguments. I don't really understand how people can make these arguments and then claim that they're scientific and true when part of their basic argument is to reject the existence of reality. So I won't really go into this much. But basically it's ideas that time doesn't exist, which I just don't really entertain even. So, why the first cause must be beyond time and space, or in other words, supernatural. So the cause of the universe must be uncaused, timeless, changeless, and eternal. Why? Because all natural phenomena must have a cause. Anything natural, or in other words, anything that comes into existence, must have a cause. Thus, to avoid the problem of infinite regress, that is, an infinite chain of events, which is impossible because the universe is only 14 billion years old, which, while a long amount of time, is not eternal. You cannot have an infinite number of events over a finite length of time. So, if all natural phenomenon did not pre-exist the universe, and this is the first time the universe... Okay, so let's just go over this. So the universe began to exist 14 billion years ago. That's when all natural things came into existence. We know that it first came into existence 14 billion years ago because the nature of how reality works, or how physical reality works, is the universe does not oscillate and it is not eternal. So it came into being at that time and did not exist before that time. So, if everything begins to exist has a cause, anything natural that exists has a cause, and there's a finite amount of time in the past, then the only remaining logical explanation is there is something supernatural, or something beyond the natural realm that is not bound by the normal rules of time or space, especially if it existed prior to the existence of time and space. So admittedly, this can be kind of hard to grasp, since we exist within time and space, and we can't really think about something that exists beyond it. Probably, people often use numbers, because that's the closest thing we have to something that objectively exists beyond time and space. 1 plus 1 always equal 2 regardless of the universe and regardless of how you consider reality. So, I would posit, and many have posited, that an eternal uncaused cause must have given rise to the universe. And this is supernatural, and this is not physical, because physical matter did not exist before the universe. Hopefully that makes sense. It can be a bit complicated. I think it's fairly logical and straightforward when you think about it. So why must this cause be a personal being? So why can't this cause just be some supernatural cause that existed then and then never existed again? So, in theories of free will, philosophical theories of free will, there's a type of theory, one of the four main families of theories, called libertarian theories. And the core of libertarian theories is something called agent causation. This posits that living beings are fundamentally different things than non-living beings. That is, a man is fundamentally different than a rock, because men, and to some extent animals, have intentionality, will, and a mind. Thus, unlike things, they can be a cause in and of themselves. That is, you can make a decision, and that is a cause. You don't have to go further back. A mind is something fundamentally different, and it can cause things. And even if you don't accept this, it's the closest thing we have to the idea of something creating the universe. It's the closest thing to something that is a cause in and of itself, without just being having something prior to it. So this is probably best done through an example. So Aristotle formulated, a rock is moved by a staff, which is moved by a hand, which is moved by a man. And you don't need to go further back than that, because a man has intentionality, and he is the cause of that. It's like when you say, I'm going to have breakfast today. You are a cause, and you don't need to go further back than that. You can have things that influence you, like you're hungry. But ultimately, the decision is something that your mind makes, something that your mind creates. And you can accept this or not, but I think this is the best explanation. I think this is straightforward, it makes sense, and it's intuitively true. So, the first cause cannot have a prior cause because it exists prior to the change of causation. Thus, it must have intentionality and freedom of will, because that's the closest thing we have. An artist's decision to make a painting is the closest thing we have in the universe to an uncaused metaphysical cause. And there's other explanations for this, but this is the one I like, so I'm using it. So, one can object to this in a variety of ways, but regardless, the cause cannot be mechanical. As, for example, water freezing cannot exist prior to the cause. The cause cannot be mechanical as an effect. So water freezing cannot exist. So in other words, the effect of water freezing, the effect of the temperature being below zero is that water freezes. Water cannot be frozen before the temperature is below zero. Ergo, the universe is an effect of a cause. And the effect cannot exist before the cause, therefore the cause existed first. And a cause in of itself is a mind, which is the creator. Finally, keep in mind, the cause's desire to create the universe can be temporal, while the creation of the universe can be... The cause's desire to create the universe can be intemporal. I made a mistake there. Well, the creation of the universe can be temporal. So, the desire of the supreme intelligence who created the universe, that can be intemporal. But the creation of the universe can exist, is temporal, because when the universe was created, time started. So it can exist eternally, the desire to create the universe, while the universe also having a definitive beginning, and these two do not contradict each other. So, what have we established so far? That the universe began to exist at a specified time in the past, and had a cause. This cause must be supernatural, eternal, and unchanging, and this cause must also be personal. We have established that an indefinite being that created the universe, but we don't know much about him. This will be explored later on. Okay. So basically, we've established the universe has a creator, that there is this very vaguely defined being, but all we know about him at the moment is that he gave rise to the universe. We don't know anything else about him. He could just be a blind watchmaker for all we know. But we do know that there was a first cause that was a mind who gave rise to creation. And we will build on that from there. This is Argument Templar signing out.